My older brother Leo and I were embarking on a wilderness expedition on the eastern seaboard. Leo, as was his custom, meticulously selected the locations in every detail, while I simply accompanied him. He chose wisely. However, the campsite was quite pleasant, and since it required a hike to reach, it was not crowded. As far as we could ascertain, there was no one else around. The campsite itself wasn't precisely defined. It was difficult to tell if we were even in the correct spot. There were several clearings in the trees that appeared as though they could have been our designated area, but neither of us believed it mattered significantly. We established our camp in one of the grassy clearings, and while we initially thought this place was rather secluded, we soon realized we were mistaken. There were discarded items, scattered about nothing substantial like entire tents, but merely small objects, such as a trekking pole or some worn footwear. It was unusual for such items to be left behind, especially at remote campsites like this. We both found it peculiar, but proceeded with our day. We didn't engage in many activities, mostly just relaxed and conversed. As darkness descended, we kindled a fire and sat around it. A couple of hours into the night, I happened to spot something behind Leo. I pointed at it, unsure of its nature. Both of us looked, and after a few moments, we were able to discern that it was a small campfire. It was quite distant and partially obscured by the numerous trees, but a tiny orange flame flickered in the distance. Had it not been for the moonlight being veiled by clouds and the absolute darkness of the woods, there was no way we would have been able to notice it. I suppose we weren't alone, though it was a little odd that they were out in that direction, as it seemed to be nothing but dense forest there, with no clearings or suitable spots for a campsite. Perhaps they desired complete isolation or something similar. We didn't dwell on it excessively. We retrieved some snacks and beverages and conversed until we were thoroughly exhausted. We extinguished the fire and retired to our tents around midnight. I fell asleep quite comfortably, experiencing no difficulties whatsoever. However, I awoke at some point in the night. It must have been only an hour or two after I had fallen asleep. I knew precisely why I had woken up. I had consumed a bit too much liquid right before bed and needed to relieve myself. I got up and unzipped the tent. I walked out approximately 50 feet from the campsite to ensure I didn't attract any animals and took care of my business. But as I was out there, I noticed the flame far out in the forest was still illuminated. Perhaps it was because I was tired or simply disoriented for some reason, but I stood there and stared at it for a minute. I'm not even sure why, but my eyes began adjusting to the darkness. As I stood there and as I looked out into the woods, I suddenly noticed something else. It appeared to be a figure somewhere far out between me and the distant flame I was observing. I felt a shock for a moment, but I told myself it couldn't actually be a person and had to be a strange-looking bush or something. There was no way someone was out in the dark outside our camp at this time of night. But I kept looking, trying to make out what I could, when I started to notice more of these figure-like shadows in the woods. They were so distant, and it was so dark, I couldn't tell if my mind was just playing tricks on me. If they were people, however, there were at least 10 or 15 of them, and they seemed to all be looking directly at me. Another shock ran through me. What the hell is this? I almost thought I was hallucinated. I turned around and hurried back to the tent. I debated for a second whether to wake Leo up. I knew if it was nothing, I'd never hear the end of it, but my gut was telling me otherwise. I opened his tent and shook him awake. He was really confused at first, but I just told him I thought I saw something and wanted a second opinion. He hesitantly got up and I started to lead him out to where I was, but we didn't get very far. The figures I had seen had moved. They were closer standing, all spread out among the trees. I truly hoped at this point I was just seeing things, but I slowly looked back at Leo and could see the pale, fear-covered expression on his face, his eyes wide open. He saw what I saw. I looked back out, and it was more apparent than ever that these were people. I could see their subtle movements as they stood there and watched us. We backed up toward our tents. Should we leave, I can still vividly remember Leo, his shaky voice as he spoke those words. He was always so confident and sure of what to do. It was terrifying seeing and hearing him like that. I nodded, and neither of us grabbed any of our belongings aside from the car keys and our wallets. We hurried away, and down the trail it seemed that they did not follow us. We reported what happened to the local authorities, feeling it was necessary. They didn't take it too seriously, though very clearly thinking we were crazy. like there was no way a whole group of people were out in the woods at night messing with us. We thought about the strange amount of left-behind things we saw in the area, and had hoped others had already gone to the police about similar encounters. But nobody had. There were no official accounts of anything happening there. Maybe they just went unreported, or maybe nobody ever made it back. This incident occurred 2 years ago in the middle of spring. I had taken time off from work to go camping at a small body of water in northern Verdun. It was a location I had visited a couple of times with friends or family who chose to accompany me, but this time it was just myself. The trek to reach there took approximately 2 hours, but it was not overly strenuous, mostly just a flat path the entire way. I set up my shelter and other provisions a bit further, into the woods so as not to be directly adjacent to the lake. Then I unfolded my chair, opened a beverage, and listened to the tranquil sounds of the water and the chirping of birds. It was already late in the day, so I didn't have much time before the sun began to set. I always enjoyed nighttime in the woods. However, it was invariably so quiet and almost felt liberating in a way. I don't know how else to describe it. However, this night was different. Once the sun had descended, I built a campfire and continued relaxing. Yet an unfamiliar sensation came over me. I felt as though I was being observed. I repeatedly scanned the trees and the surrounding darkness, experiencing an uneasy, almost paranoid feeling. I was never typically like this, so I wasn't sure what was happening. Every time I looked around, though, I saw nothing at all. The problem was that it was so dark. I'm not sure I would have been able to see anything, even if there was something or someone out there watching me. Of course, with no tangible reason to feel the way I did my best to suppress these thoughts and try to ease my mind away from it. Eventually, I managed to distract myself by contemplating some personal matters I was dealing with in my life. It wasn't a pleasant distraction, but I suppose it was preferable to being paranoid. Hours passed. I would estimate it was about 10 or 11 p.m. by this point, when there was a very sudden and loud cracker directly in front of me, like a large stick snapping under heavy weight from somewhere just ahead. It was pitch black out there. I couldn't discern anything. The sound was so loud, though, it echoed across the woods. A shiver ran through me. It sounded like something heavy stepping on a branch. Was it a large animal, or was it a person? I wasn't sure which I was more afraid of. I pulled out my animal deterrent spray, then called out, "Hello, is anyone out there?" There wasn't even the slightest sound in response to my voice. I couldn't help but feel that if it were a large animal, I would have heard them walking around, brushing up against the bushes and crunching the leaves. I kind of just sat there for a minute, staring out into the dark and waiting to see or hear something, before I remembered I had brought a flashlight with me. I dug through my backpack and grabbed it, but by then, it had already been a minute or two, and when I shined it out there, it was empty, nothing out there at all. Obviously, I was starting to feel paranoid again, but this time it felt justified. I quickly tended to the fire, adding in some more wood to ensure it didn't burn out, and remained bright enough to illuminate my campsite. Every couple of minutes, I turned my flashlight back on and just scanned the area. Then one time I turned it on. I immediately saw something at the far end of the light's beam. It was a person, definitively a man. They were unusually tall, not inhumanly so, but perhaps around 6'5". They instantly moved out of the light, retreating further back where the light could not reach. My adrenaline was pumping. Had my intuition been correct this entire time, I thought back to the sound I heard earlier and how it sounded like something large enough to make such a loud cracking noise. The man I saw was enormous. At that height, he was probably 250 pounds at least. It had to have been him, which meant he was out there watching me for who knows how long. I panicked, dismantling my tent and shoving my belongings into my backpack. I knew which way he had run from the light, so I ran off in the opposite direction, which also happened to be back toward my vehicle. After a while, I felt safe enough to turn on my flashlight on the dim setting and walk the rest of the way. While I walked, I tried to conceive reasons for his presence out there. Something definitely would have transpired, I have no doubt about it, but the man was huge. Why didn't he simply attack me or rob me immediately? Why wait and watch me? The only thing I could think of is if he might have been trying to ascertain if I possessed a firearm or a weapon, or he could have just been waiting for me to fall asleep. I got back to my car and drove home. I still go out camping, but it has never been the same since that night. Now I always have that paranoid feeling like I'm being watched, from somewhere that I cannot perceive. Hopefully it is just a feeling. This incident occurred a while ago. I believe it was 2014. I reside in a rather wooded community surrounded by extensive forests and numerous small campgrounds within an hour's drive. I had a 4-day weekend off from work and hadn't had an opportunity to get out for some time. So I decided to head to one of these campgrounds for a relaxed weekend camping excursion. The campground I selected was a small one where you park in a compact dirt area and choose one of the 3 available sites to pitch your shelter. Fire pits were already established, and there were even some grills and benches. They looked quite worn, but I suppose some individuals still utilized them. All 3 spots were vacant, however, and no other vehicles were present, so I simply chose the one on the far left and deposited all my belongings there. The walk from my truck to the campsite was only about 5 minutes, but the area was very densely covered in trees, so it still felt as though I was completely immersed in the woods. Additionally, the actual camping ground was approximately 45 minutes from town. It was about an hour into my stay that I realized I had no idea what to do. Should I just sit here and relax or read a book? I wasn't entirely sure. I thought perhaps there was a path or something I could walk on, so I returned to the entrance area to see if there was anything of the sort. There wasn't, but there was another car next to mine now. It was an old red sedan, a really ancient model, rusted all over and covered in dents and scratches. One particularly strange detail I noticed about it was that it lacked a license plate on either the front or the back. I wasn't entirely sure what to make of it, but I figured they must have been camping at one of the other spots. With no trail available, I returned to my campsite and simply sat on a log. After only 10 minutes, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I looked back. There was a man walking down the trail. He carried no backpack or any other gear, and he was looking directly at me as if he were coming down specifically to speak to me or ask me something. The man appeared to be in his 30s, but he almost looked older, due to his overall presentation, or rather lack thereof. His brown jacket was riddled with holes and covered in stains, and his beard and hair were oily and unkempt. "You wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he inquired. Having nothing else to do, I said sure, and stood up. But he quickly responded with a thank you, and stated he was just asking for now. He still had some tasks to complete first, but he would return in a little while to get me when he needed a hand. I said okay, and he thanked me again, then walked away. I wasn't too sure why he had come by if he didn't need me immediately, but I figured he probably just had to unpack his car first and would be back in 10 or 15 minutes. I sat and waited, but half an hour passed and then another. By then the sun was setting, and I thought he must have managed to get it done himself. Whatever it was, 2 hours later, I had completely forgotten about it. I had the fire pit lit and was preparing my dinner when I heard footsteps behind me again. I looked back, but this time it was eerily dark. I could hear his footsteps coming down the trail, but he was completely obscured by darkness. I couldn't even discern his silhouette. I listened to the crunching steps against the gravel slowly make their way into the light of my campfire. It was the same man, just as I had thought. But I didn't understand why he came back, though it was so late now. "Hey, you ready? Just need a little help still," he said. With what I asked, my voice betraying my hesitation. He noticed my reluctance. "It'll only take a minute, you're not busy by the looks of it," he said jokingly with a smile, but it felt odd, like he was being pushy. He also avoided my question. My social awkwardness, however, failed me here because I nervously agreed, knowing I really had nothing else to do. And it was obvious. He smiled again and started leading the way. As we got further from my campfire, it grew significantly darker, and I realized how peculiar it was that he walked here without a flashlight. It also felt strange following him into the dark. "Hey, so what was it you needed my help for?" I asked. He slowed down for a split second as if he was going to say something, but then he continued walking and did not answer. I felt my heart rate spiking. My body instinctively knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the silence of the forest around me felt disturbingly eerie. Like a calm before the storm, I began slowing down, attempting to create some distance between us without it being too obvious. I only managed to get a few feet away before he turned around and looked at me. He had a creepy fake smile that immediately shifted into a frown. When he saw me further away, he stopped walking, and so did I. Before I could say anything, I saw his hand reach down into his jacket, and I immediately turned and sprinted deeper into the woods. After just seeing the handle of what I could only assume was a knife, I could hear his footsteps pounding against the ground and his heavy breathing as he chased me through the dark forest. Probably a good 2 minutes. He started slowing down, and eventually it was just the sound of ME running through the woods. Luckily, I had my phone and keys on me, so I called emergency services. When they arrived at the camping grounds, only my truck was there. The red car was gone, and so was the man. I described everything for them as both the car and the man had such a distinct look, but that information was not enough. I think it is pretty clear what was about to happen that night, but there doesn't seem to be any reason why, aside from the fact that I was camping alone. The way the man waited until night to attempt it, and how he came by during the day so that I would be more likely to follow him later, is terrifyingly manipulative. I'm worried others may fall victim to it, or possibly already have.